The year 1858 marked the climax of Lincoln's political resurrection, the race for the U.S. Senate against his longtime rival, Stephen A. Douglas. The contest consisted of 7 massive, direct debates across Illinois, drawing thousands of spectators and media coverage that captivated the entire nation. This was more than a local election. It was a duel for the philosophical soul of America. Douglas, the reigning champion, was everything Lincoln was not. Short, powerfully built, impeccably dressed, and known for his booming voice and aggressive, often demagogic oratory. Lincoln was tall, awkward, dressed in ill-fitting suits, and spoke with a high-pitched, almost thin voice. Yet Lincoln consistently outmatched Douglas in logic and moral depth. Douglas hammered home the principle of popular sovereignty and accused Lincoln of being a dangerous abolitionist bent on racial equality, a charge that would have alienated much of the Illinois electorate. Lincoln, in turn, refused to concede the moral high ground. He clarified his position. He did not believe in full political or social equality between the races, but he fiercely maintained that the Declaration of Independence meant that black men were entitled to the inalienable right to eat the bread they earned with their own hands. He argued that allowing slavery to expand eroded the moral foundation of American republicanism itself. The key moment came during the second debate in Freeport. Lincoln, through shrewd political strategy, cornered Douglas by forcing him to answer a critical question. Could the people of a territory lawfully exclude slavery prior to the formation of a state constitution, despite the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which stated that Congress could not exclude slavery from the territories? Douglas, desperate to hold on to the support of his Illinois base, which was against slavery expansion, answered in the affirmative. Yes, he argued, the people could exclude slavery simply by failing to pass local police regulations protecting it. This became known as the Freeport Doctrine. It was a brilliant strategic trap. While the answer pleased the Northern Democrats, it utterly alienated the Southern Democrats, who felt Douglas was betraying their cause and defying the Dred Scott ruling. Lincoln lost the Senate race. Senators were then chosen by the state legislature, which narrowly favored the Democrats, but he won the war. The Freeport Doctrine drove a permanent wedge into the Democratic Party, making Douglas unacceptable to the South and ensuring that when Lincoln ran for president 2 years later, his main opposition would be fatally divided. The debates elevated Lincoln from a regional lawyer to a national political figure, whose clear, eloquent moral voice was now heard across the land. The national recognition Lincoln gained from the debates laid the groundwork for his astonishing run for the presidency. The final leap from obscurity to national prominence came in February 1860 with an invitation to speak in New York City.
The 4 months between Lincoln's election in November 1860 and his inauguration in March 1861 were a period of escalating national chaos and presidential impotence. Lincoln, the president-elect, held no executive power, while the outgoing Buchanan administration seemed paralyzed, unwilling to stop the South's organized dismantling of the Union. The secession movement was immediate and organized. South Carolina, true to its word, seceded in December 1860. By the time Lincoln prepared to travel to Washington, 6 more states, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, had followed suit, forming the Confederate States of America. Southern leaders openly seized federal forts, arsenals, and customs houses, effectively treating the Union as a foreign enemy. Lincoln watched this collapse from Springfield, Illinois, maintaining a strategic public silence. He refused to engage in the endless, hopeless compromises proposed by Northern moderates that would have required him to surrender his core principle, the non-extension of slavery. His resolve was cold and clear. The Union was perpetual, and secession was anarchy. His journey to Washington, D.C. was less a triumphant parade and more a covert operation. Threats against his life were rampant, amplified by a real assassination plot uncovered by Detective Alan Pinkerton in Baltimore, a city rife with Southern sympathizers. Under the cloak of darkness and secrecy, Lincoln was smuggled onto a midnight train, bypassing Baltimore and arriving silently and unceremoniously in Washington, D.C. This humiliating and dangerous entry, widely mocked by the Southern press as cowardly, was a stark reflection of the nation he was about to lead. He did not arrive as the powerful victor. He arrived as a beleaguered man entering a hostile, besieged capital. Washington, D.C. itself was a nerve center of secessionist sentiment, surrounded by the slave states of Maryland and Virginia. Lincoln found himself presiding over a government whose own military officers and civil servants were openly declaring loyalty to the Confederacy. On March 4, 1861, Abraham Lincoln delivered his first inaugural address. The speech was a powerful articulation of his constitutional argument against secession, blending firmness with heartbreaking appeal. He pleaded with the South, reminding them that the bonds of affection still connected the two sides. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from the 4 months between Lincoln's election in November 1860 and his inauguration in March 1861, were a period of escalating national chaos and presidential impotence. Lincoln, the president-elect, held no executive power, while the outgoing Buchanan administration seemed paralyzed, unwilling to stop the South's organized dismantling of the Union. The secession movement was immediate and organized. South Carolina, true to its word, seceded in December 1860. By the time Lincoln prepared to travel to Washington, 6 more states, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, had followed suit, forming the Confederate States of America. Southern leaders openly seized federal forts, arsenals, and customs houses, effectively treating the Union as a foreign enemy. Lincoln watched this collapse from Springfield, Illinois, maintaining a strategic public silence. He refused to engage in the endless, hopeless compromises proposed by Northern moderates that would have required him to surrender his core principle, the non-extension of slavery. His resolve was cold and clear. The Union was perpetual, and secession was anarchy. His journey to Washington, D.C. was less a triumphant parade and more a covert operation. Threats against his life were rampant, amplified by a real assassination plot uncovered by Detective Alan Pinkerton in Baltimore, a city rife with Southern sympathizers. Under the cloak of darkness and secrecy, Lincoln was smuggled onto a midnight train, bypassing Baltimore and arriving silently and unceremoniously in Washington, D.C. This humiliating and dangerous entry, widely mocked by the Southern press as cowardly, was a stark reflection of the nation he was about to lead. He did not arrive as the powerful victor. He arrived as a beleaguered man entering a hostile, besieged capital. Washington, D.C. itself was a nerve center of secessionist sentiment, surrounded by the slave states of Maryland and Virginia. Lincoln found himself presiding over a government whose own military officers and civil servants were openly declaring loyalty to the Confederacy. On March 4, 1861, Abraham Lincoln delivered his first inaugural address. The speech was a powerful articulation of his constitutional argument against secession, blending firmness with heartbreaking appeal. He pleaded with the South, reminding them that the bonds of affection still connected the two sides. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. the mystic chords of memory, stretching from...
On March 4, 1865, Lincoln delivered his second inaugural address. It was perhaps the most remarkable speech ever given by a victorious wartime leader. There was no boast, no triumphant gloating, and no condemnation of the South. Instead, the speech was a profound piece of theological and political philosophy, reflecting on the terrible price of the war. He stated that the war was God's punishment on both North and South for the collective sin of slavery. The war's immense suffering, he suggested, was divine vengeance for 250 years of unrequited toil. The address concluded with the most merciful words of the conflict. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. This was not a call for vengeance, but for reconciliation. Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction was based on forgiveness and quick reentry for the Southern states, the 10% plan, demonstrating that his ultimate goal remained what it always was: union. The war's end came swiftly after the second inaugural. Grant's continuous siege broke the back of Lee's forces. In early April 1865, the Confederate capital of Richmond fell. On April 9, 1865, at the village of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, General Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia to General Grant. The terms of surrender were dictated by Lincoln's spirit of reconciliation. Confederate soldiers were allowed to keep their horses, necessary for spring planting, and return home unmolested. There was no public humiliation, only quiet respect. The war was effectively over. The jubilation in Washington, D.C. was ecstatic. The nightmare had finally ended. Lincoln's final public address, delivered on April 11, 1865, centered on his plan for Reconstruction. He spoke about bringing the seceded states back into the Union fold, a process he knew would be messy and difficult. He specifically mentioned the delicate issue of extending the franchise, voting rights, to black men, particularly the very intelligent and on those who have fought bravely in our ranks. This was the final evolution of Lincoln's moral arc, from resisting slavery's extension to preserving the Union, to ending slavery, and finally to embracing black citizenship. He looked forward.
On January 1, 1863, after weeks of anxious waiting, Abraham Lincoln finally issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It was not a grand abolitionist decree, but a cold, wartime military order, freeing all enslaved people in the states currently in rebellion against the Union. Slavery in the loyal border states, like Maryland and Kentucky, remained untouched, a deliberate political concession to keep them in the Union. The immediate reaction was mixed. Abolitionists thought it didn't go far enough. Moderate Northern Democrats denounced it as a radical, unconstitutional power grab, leading to significant political losses for the Republican Party in the 1862 midterm elections. The Confederacy, predictably, viewed it as an act of ruthless malice, but the proclamation fundamentally changed the purpose of the war. It guaranteed that a Union victory would mean the end of slavery, attracting thousands of enslaved people to Union lines and authorizing the recruitment of black soldiers, the United States colored troops, injecting a necessary moral and physical boost to the war effort. The war's ultimate turning point arrived 6 months later, in the summer of 1863. For Lincoln, it was a moment of simultaneous triumph and terror. In the West, General Ulysses S. Grant finally concluded his masterful Vicksburg campaign, capturing the last major Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River on July 4th. This victory effectively split the Confederacy in two, allowing the Union to control the vital waterway. Meanwhile, in the East, General Robert E. Lee launched his second, desperate invasion of the North, pushing deep into Pennsylvania. The fate of the Union hung on a series of terrible, bloody clashes near a small town called Gettysburg. From July 1 to 3, the Army of the Potomac, now under General George Meade,
finally repulsed the Confederate assault in the greatest battle ever fought on American soil. Lee's army retreated, never again to launch a major invasion of the North. Lincoln understood the profound significance of these twin victories. He had secured the West and repelled the East. The war was far from over, but the Union was safe. 4 months later, in November 1863, Lincoln traveled to dedicate the new National Cemetery at Gettysburg. His address was not the main event. Famed orator Edward Everett spoke for 2 hours. Lincoln spoke for less than 3 minutes, delivering a speech so brief that the official photographer didn't even have time to set up his camera. Yet the Gettysburg Address became the most important speech in American history. It subtly, profoundly redefined the entire conflict. Lincoln did not mention the Constitution, Vicksburg, or even the Emancipation Proclamation. He anchored the war to the Declaration of Independence, to the idea that the nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The soldiers did not die to save the Union as it was. They died to ensure that government of the people, by the people, for the people,